Now, technically, it gets a little bit, array is really just the type of an object. Remember how we talked about objects last week? And how objects, you can store information in an object's properties, and you can retrieve that information by the name of the property. Right? Arrays are, you can store lists of information in arrays, but you retrieve them through an index number. So in an object, you retrieve the information by its property name, but in an array, you retrieve the information out of the list with its index number. And the big thing to remember is that in JavaScript, they always count up from 0. So the first item is always item 0, the second item is item 1, and so on and so on. Okay, so if you remember that, you can store information in arrays. You can put a loop that goes through and grabs all the information in the array and prints it. You could have 2 arrays where you store different information that is linked to each other by its index number. So you can have a question array and an answer array, and question index 0 would tie in with answer index 0, and you can do all kinds of maybe useful things that way. So in some ways you can think of an array as a database. It's a way to store information. Now, the other really nice thing about arrays in JavaScript is that JavaScript has a lot of built-in methods that can manipulate arrays. So you can sort them and reorder them and split them and add things to them, or so you can manipulate those items in the array using various JavaScript methods. So just kind of the big picture idea, you can think of an array very similar to what we talked about last week in objects, but instead of identifying the items in the array by a name, you identify them by an index number. That's kind of one of the big ideas. So we used to in JavaScript, years ago, talk about associative arrays, but that's totally out of fashion, and so we really don't consider associative arrays a part of JavaScript. An associative array would be an array that instead of an index number, you'd use a name. So if you want to identify information by using a name, then you would define an object, and then use property names to identify the items in the object. You use arrays to identify a list of items by an index number. So that's a difference between an array and an object. Okay. I'm going to show you, in the tutorial, I show you how the 2 different ways that you can define an array, but it's actually, they'll still work, but again, things change, and both those ways, I think, are good in that they help you understand what an array is by typing it out the way that I describe in the lab. But I want you to understand that they are also kind of out of fashion now in JavaScript, and that a much simpler way is used to define arrays. You no longer have to use the new object to define arrays, even though it's done in our tutorial. To define an array, you can just say var, whatever you want to call the array, let's say names, and then you just put it in square brackets, and you separate each item in your array by a comma. Right? If you remember last week, we defined objects, but we used curly brackets, right, instead of square brackets. So whenever you see the square brackets, you're saying, oh, that's an array. It's defining an array. So this is all you have to do now to define an array. And I'm going to show you a little more complicated way because I think it helps explain what an array is, doing it the kind of complicated way. But I want you to know that all you need to do, it looks very much like a variable, var, variable name. It's actually an array name. We know it's an array because we've got the square brackets. And so that's kind of it's much simpler, less typing to do it this way, and that's the way they want you to do it. Now, I'm going to show you in the lab this kind of the traditional way to do it, and then talk about why that's no longer an accepted practice, that they expect this kind of simpler way now. Just so that you'll see what I'm going to show you now if you look at older JavaScripts, but you'll also see this way in newer JavaScripts. And I'll explain why this way is more accepted. Okay?
Yeah, that's for Julie.
Yeah, she told me she was going to do that. So, all right. She can't see me, huh? So
I was trying to figure out a way to do that, but
You have like two cameras and have one on the screen.
yes, like all the fancy guys do. All right, so I'll try to be a little more. Make sure, hopefully, I'm loud enough. All right, so let's launch Dreamweaver, and we are going to create an array here. So very simply, an array is just an ordered collection of data. And that data in the array, it can be a text string, it can be a number, it can be a Boolean value. It actually can even be another array. So kind of an array inside an array. And remember, arrays automatically assign an index number to each item in the array. And those numbers start from 0. When you reference an item in an array, you reference it by the array name and that index number inside brackets, those square brackets. That way, only that single item in the array is returned instead of every single, all the list of information. So let's create a new HTML5 page. We're going to call this, we're going to save it as Lab 7. Save it in a 513 folder. Guess we'll continue our practice of saving this in the JavaScript folder. Lab 7 underscore JS underscore names. And let's just give it an appropriate title. Lab 7 JavaScript array. Zoom in a little bit so everybody can see it. So we're going to add some script tags. And the old way that you would do this, if you wanted to create an array, is you would say var, and you would give your variable name for the array. You would say equals, and then you would say new array, and then you would list the names of, I don't want you to type this yet, you would list the names of the items that, in this example I had, say, a list of 4 names, and a text string. Okay? Sometimes what you would see, as far as the syntax, is you would see them create a new array. You put a number here telling this new array to pre-slot how many items are going to be in the array. And then what you would do is you would write name, bracket, 0, bracket, and then you would actually then put what the item is that was going to be in the array. So the benefit of this way is it's very obvious or very explicit that name the first, or that name 0 is containing the text string John. Okay? They're very, very kind of explicit about it. But the problem with this is, what if you decide to only have 1 or 2 items in the array, but you've told you've created an array that is reserving the space for 4 items. Now, it's not that big a deal if you have 4 items, but what if you put 400 things here? You know, now that array is taking up, the space, reserving in the computer's memory space for 400 items. And let's say you only end up using 5 or 6 of them. You're not being efficient, and it can cause problems later on. So even though this has been kind of the common practice way to define arrays for years, it's kind of somewhat discouraged to use this new array object. So instead, what you will see is something that looks like this, and we can type this. It's just the names of the items in your array.
We wouldn't use single quotes here. Always double quotes.
You could. There's no reason why either one is fine. So if you wanted to use single quotes, you could. You could use double quotes. Again, if you were using, if I wanted to include HTML inside here with properties, I would have to use, don't type this up, but if I was going to do stuff like this, I would have to use single quotes here because I was using double quotes out here. So that would be, but you could do it the other way. So there's meaning that I could have used single quotes out here. I would just have to be consistent and use single quotes around all of it. Okay? So, if I wanted to return George and access just George from this array, does anyone know how I would do that? What would I type to just access George?
No, 2.
So I would type the name of the array, and then the syntax is the square
2.
brackets. And then I would put 2. 0 would be John. 1 would be Paul. 2 would be George. This would return the text string George. Okay? So let's just do it the other way once so that we see what it looks like. So let's say var instrument equals new array, and we'll say instrument So you can see how this is a lot more typing than this. All right? But if you're just learning, this might be easier to understand. Does that make sense? Because they're making more explicit the relationship between the index number and what's stored in it. But you're going to see this more often as a way of defining arrays today. If you have old JavaScript, you might see this. So the result of this is that we've created two arrays that contain an index-ordered list of information. They both contain text strings, and the computer doesn't know there's any relationship between these two arrays. I've just created a relationship by matching their index numbers with their instrument and the name. So I want to create a for loop, and I want to be able to loop through both arrays, and using a document.write statement, I want to print various sentences that combine information from both arrays. So if you remember from last week what a for loop looks like, you type for, and then you have three properties in your condition. You have an initial value, you have a condition that tests that initial value, and then you have a next increment that increases that initial value each time it goes through the for loop. Oftentimes, the initial value is represented with the letter I for being the variable. So I'm going to say, in this example, I needs to start off with 0 because the first item in my list is, index item is a 0. And then as long as I is less than 3, 4, actually you're right, as long as I is less than 4.
We have one there.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. As long as I is less than 4. Then I want to increase I. Now, one of the shorthand ways of doing this is I plus plus. And that's the same as saying, I equals I plus 1. Okay? Now I need to open curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. So as long as this is true, we can do everything within the list. The other way I could represent this, instead of saying I is less than 4, I could say if I is less than and equal to 3, that would work too. But since we did 4, that's fine. Then we want to do our document.write statement. And the first thing we want to print is some HTML. We want to go to the next line. Then I'm going to add this name. square brackets. So why do I put I here? Let me put this here. No. I'm going to be adding more to this in a second, but so let's just see what would happen at this point. Well, if you save this, what do you think is going to happen? We just leave it at this. So the first time through, I is going to be 0. Is 0 less than 4? Yes. So it's going to put 0 here. It's going to go down to the next line with the BR tag. Then it's going to say name 0. Name 0 is John. It's going to print John to the page. Okay. Then it's going to say 0 equals 0 plus 1 is 1 less than 4. It's true. So it's going to put 1 there. Then it's going to print Paul to the page. Then it's going to loop again and say 1 equals 1 plus 1 is 2. Is 2 less than 4? Yes, it is. It's going to print 2 here. It's going to print George to the page. Then it's going to say 2 equals 2 plus 1 is 3. Is 3 less than 4? Yes. Puts 3 there. It's going to print Ringo to the next line. Then it's going to say 3 plus 1 is 4. Is 4 less than 4? False. And then it's going to jump out of the loop. Okay? So see if that works. Save it. Preview it. Oh. That's funny. All right, so let's see why was it doing that? All right. So there it's thinking that's interesting.
Yeah. Wow, what could possibly have told it to do that?
I got undefined, undefined, undefined.
You got undefined?
Yeah, 4 times.
Well, let's do it this
Put it
way.
in
Maybe I
separate.
didn't like how we did this. All right. What? Yeah, right here. So let's go back and we'll before we jump ahead, let's just change this syntax back to the old way, and then I'll show you how it works, and then we'll troubleshoot this why I did it this way. So if we go back up here and just say new array and change these brackets to a parentheses. So go here and change this. It's almost like it considered this the first item in the array. It was weird.
Like the J was the first item.
Uh-huh. Oh, I did it again, huh? That's really weird. You guys getting the same thing?
Yeah.
That's weird. What am I missing? That's good. That's interesting.
It is taking the letters as the
Yeah, it's
indexes.
taking the first letters of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got these. I have no idea why it's doing that. I have not seen that before. I've done this for years. All right, let me brainstorm this. Why would it be doing that? So we've got a new array. Let's just do this. Get rid of this. Let's preview it. So I was thinking maybe that was it. Then why is it looping? Let's do. Where am I here? That's plus. And it works. All right. So you could, again, use this way. Just use the name of the array, and then the square brackets are what let you know that this isn't just a regular variable, but it is an array that is storing an index-ordered list of information. But you might see the old way, which you don't need to type this, but again, the old way was this is kind of the old depreciated way of defining arrays, but it is kind of confusing because it's within these parentheses instead of brackets. So I can understand why that's now being discouraged, but it still works. Okay? Wow. That was entertaining. Just to demonstrate where the loop begins and stops, we could do a document, another document write statement outside the array. Oh my goodness.
Not Hey Jude.
There you go. I guess I did use names in my old tutorials. I just can't read. I was reading my old tutorials and it said names, not names. So I was right all along. I just am sick and I can't think straight tonight. Glad no one's videotaping this. Oh! Hey, if she's got to watch this, I got to entertain her or something. Okay. I guess I should close the paragraph. All right, so this is just to demonstrate that you can see the loop, and then you can see that the loop stops, and then outside the loop, this next statement would print. So I'll give you a second to type that. The other benefit of doing this is when we start manipulating our array, we're going to see how that might change what is printed here. So I'll leave this here, give you a second to type that. And again, all we've done is create an array, print the contents of the array, and then using an index number, print a single item from the array to the screen. Now, the real power in arrays is that arrays have these properties, or specifically these methods that enable you to manipulate the arrays in certain ways, and we're going to do that next.
So you're just saying the part that we just did below, it doesn't do all four names, it just does whichever one you tell it to.
Yeah. So that one, since we're not using a variable here, we're not looping through it. So it's going through and looping through all the names. And then once the loop returns false by going to 4, it's going to jump out of that loop. And then it's just going to do what's here. Now, I put just 0 here, so it's just going to put John. So.
That's George Carlin, right? Just kidding.
Yeah, there you go. You watched the SNL last night?
I was starting to watch it earlier, and I haven't got all the way through it yet.
I watched the whole thing. So.
Is that the anniversary one?
Yeah, it was actually very, very entertaining.
I saw the first 5 minutes. Makes you cringe and belly laugh. And
Yeah, it was. I mean, parts of it were pretty bad, but
yeah,
It's Saturday Night Live.
Live.
it is. It is. Great memories, though. Okay, James, what am I missing?
All right, so there's multiple ways to manipulate an arrays, and what we want to do now is we want to sort the elements of the array in alphabetical order using the sort method. So we're going to add a line of code after the for loop and before the document.write statement. So after the loop, before these document.write statements down here, we are going to manipulate the names array by typing names.sort. So what this does, since it's after the loop's going to go through and it's going to print our statements like before. After that's done, this is going to say, all right, take the order of this and now put it in alphabetical order. So, who are we going to be saying hello to now?
Does sort always mean alphabetical?
Yeah. You can change the alphabetical by adding some properties here, like reverse alphabetical order. Actually, usually you just say reverse instead of sort. And I guess I can demonstrate that. So if you just preview it now, it should say hi to George. Because George is now alphabetically the first item in the array, which if we added this loop again, that means that George would be playing guitar, not playing lead guitar, and we'd have instrumental mismatch. So if you have two arrays that are associated to each other and you alphabetize them, you could break that association. All right. You can also add items to the array after they're defined using something called the push method. We're going to try reverse. Let's see if reverse works. So if we go here and say reverse, I think it's reverse, and preview it, yeah, it says Ringo. So that put it in reverse alphabetical order. So sort and reverse. I guess we should go back to sort since that's what we're doing in the tutorial. I wanted to show that to you. So you can add items to an array using the push method. This will add an element to the end of an array and then return the array's length. So I'm going to add the first drummer to the Beatles to this, and in this example, we're going to do it before we print the item before the loop. Okay, so that's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to go up here, and we're going to add a item to the names array by typing names dot push, and then I'm going to type Pete Best. A little bit of a Beatles nerd, sorry about that. And so that is going to add, what would be his index number? 4. Exactly, right? It's going to add him to the end. And now
he won't populate in there because he's at, well, if you put greater than or equal to 3.
Yeah, so we put, even if we put 4 greater than or equal to 3, we've got a couple problems here. So one of is that you don't want to get in a situation where you are concentrating the arrays. You're dynamically maybe adding or taking things away from the array, and you have a loop here, and having to remember to go back and change how many times you're going through the loop, right? So oftentimes what is done instead of actually putting a number there is that you want to put there a variable that contains the length of the array. So if you dynamically change the length of the array, it'll still loop through everything. Okay, so we're going to do that by kind of going to our loop there, and we're going to say it is less than names.length. So instead of putting 4, we're going to say it's less than names.length. Okay? Now,
could that be less than or equal to?
just less than. So let's do this real quickly. Let's go right here, and let's type document.write names.length, and let's see what number gets printed to the page. So before John here, we've got 4 that is printed to the page. So see right there, it says 4. Now, what happens if we take this right here, we're going to cut it, and we're going to paste it down here, right after here. So I save it, and hit refresh. And now, that number's 5. Why? Because we used push to add a 5th item to the array there. Alright? And so, the point being is that since now it returns 5, and we want to have it less than, so what does names.length return? It returns the number of items in the array, not the highest index number. It returns the number of actual items in the array. Does that make sense? So now, by putting names.length, if we continue to push and add new items or manipulate our array in any way, we are good in our loop because we're using a variable name. So it's very, very common when you're doing loops through arrays to use the .length property of the array so that it returns the number of items in the array and it's dynamic. Okay?
For what? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What reason would we use the push rather than just adding him to the array?
So again, maybe you don't know who this is until later. So maybe it's some kind of dynamic data, and you might actually have a little form where you're having your users submit information, and so when they add new information, that is going to be stored in a variable, and you're going to use name.push to add whatever they put into the form to the end of the array, and you might not know what that is ahead of time. So, That kind of makes sense. Remember last week how we took the contents of a form? We used window .document .guestbook .firstname .value. So I could have that stored in a variable, and then that variable name placed right here. So whatever they put in that form, and when they submit it, it's going to be dynamically added to an array that maybe I've already created. That could be a reason why you would do that. All right. So if we save this, let's also add it as instrument. So let's say instrument dot push. Let's make this in a past tense here. It just works better for it. So I just changed this down here to past tense. So if we preview this, as it goes through the loops now, since we added those pushes before the loop, it's going to add that fifth statement. Now there's any questions? No? So, yes.
Sorry, I have a 5 showing up just before John's name.
Yeah, I was typing that for demonstration purposes and I deleted it. So somewhere in here there's a document.write names length. And I think we had it right there. You can just delete that.
Okay.
That was just to demonstrate so that we know how many items were in the array. So that was my fault. I was jumping around all over the place. Now I want to talk about the slice method. So the slice method enables you to select part of an array and then take those things and put them in a new array without actually manipulating the original or changing the original array. So if you use the slice method, you can create a new array and take information from one array and put it in a new array. Okay. So the syntax is the array name dot slice, and then parentheses, and then you put in a number where you start and you end as far as the items that you index items that you want to take from the array. If you omit, well, let's just do it, and then I'll talk about it. Now we need to do this before name sort because that messes up kind of our order. So we got to make sure we do this before name dot sort. So I'm going to say variable songwriters. That's going to be my new array, equals names dot slice. So I want the first songwriter to be John. I want to basically grab item 0 to item 1 out of the array, even though George is a great songwriter. But we're just going to focus on the famous ones, I guess. So I'm going to type 0, 1. So what this does is it says grab John and Paul and put them in a new array called songwriters. If I wanted to say that Paul and George were the real songwriters, I would say skip 0, grab the second item in the array, and then grab it to the third item in the array. Right? If I wanted to say George and Ringo were the songwriters, I could say 3, which means grab George and everybody after that. So it actually would have grabbed Pete Best too.
Wait, say that again. If you put 3, it would say...
It would start the array, grabbing everything in the array from... actually, that would have started, if I put 3, it would start with Ringo. And then it would have grabbed everything after that. So if there's not an end, then it just grabs the rest of the array.
How do you know there's an end to that?
What?
How do you know that's an end? So how do we know it's 0 and 1 is all that it's asking for?
So the first number is the index number for the beginning of the slice, and the second number is the index number for the end of the slice.
So if you just wanted to say 1 to 2, you just go 0, 2? Or
0 to 2, yeah. That would grab John, Paul, and George.
Cool.
Okay. Now, so if I just printed now, let's say document.write songwriters, what did I put here? Did I put 0 to 2 or 0 to 1? Oh, I put 0 to 2. I should have put 0 to 2. Sorry about that. So 0, what did we just say? So 0 is John, 1 would be Paul. So if I put 0 to 1, I'm saying start here and then end. So you were right, I would only include John. So I need to put 2 here so that it includes both John, number 0 and 1, and then it ends before 2. So it needs to be 0, 2. I am off my game tonight.
Is 2 telling you how many to take
It's telling you where to end
for them?
before that item. So the ended item, yeah. So it's going to end right before that. So there we got
Doesn't it include
John and Paul.
John, Paul, George?
So to make that a little more meaningful, or not necessarily meaningful, but just so I can show you the next thing that you can do to manipulate a array, we've got slice. There is join. So what does join do? The join takes all the elements of the array and puts them into a string, and then returns the string. The element will be separated by a specific separator that is placed between the parentheses. The default separator is a comma. But you can add a second, any separator you want. So when you use join, it takes everything in your array, puts it into a text string, returns that text string by default with a comma between each item. If you want, you can add your own separator, and we're going to do that here using join. So next I'm going to type variable songwriters equals songwriters dot join space and space.
Doesn't there need to be a quotation mark before the?
Yeah, for the T.
And then I.
Put that another way. So what does that do? Is it just put the word "and" between each item in the array? So you can leave it at this, but just to, if I included George by putting 3 here, which you don't need to do. If I change that by including George, which he was a great songwriter, so. It would say John and Paul and George. So no, why does it say "and" each time? Because we added "and" to a join, which basically means take everything in this array, put it in a text string, and separate each item in the array with the word "and."
So you could substitute any other.
I could
word with it.
substitute a slash.
Okay.
So you can put whatever you.
Could there be a way you could have a comma and then and? So it's proper English?
No, not using this method.
No comprendo.
You'd have to loop through the first 2 and then stop it, and then on the 4th one you would have to put the "and." So it would be a little, you could do it, but you would have to be, it'll be a little bit tricky. All right, so that was kind of a lot of work for something not real practical. But the next example we're going to do is much more practical, and hopefully it'll make more sense. So the takeaway from this is I wanted you to understand how to create an array, how you can use methods to manipulate the array. And the methods that we use push method to add an item to the array, push.names added pbest to our names array. We could take items out of an array and put them in a new array using the slice method. And then we could take all the items in the array, turn them into a text string, and then separate them with a specific separator using the join method. The other big thing is if you're taking the contents of the array and printing them to the page through a loop, it's always better in your loop to use the length property. In this example, we did names.length, so that you don't always have to remember how many items are in the array and then manually change them in your loop. Okay. Names.length will return however long your array is, and it's a perfect thing to use to control how many times to loop through your array. And it's the accepted method. Any questions about that? Oh, the final thing, of course, is that you could sort your arrays alphabetically using the sort method, or in reverse alphabetical order using the reverse method. Questions? You're good? Okay. Adding a random image to your page. So let's do this. We'll take an early break. Let's say about a 10-minute break or so. You might be able to get a stipend out of it. It worked for me. It was awesome, right? Like, man, web pages always changing. You're working so hard on that. We need to get you a stipend for that. That's a great idea, right? So it's really awesome. So let's show you how that works. So we're going to create a new page. And we're going to call this, what did it say we're going to call it? Guess I didn't give it a name. That's disappointing. So let's just call it Lab 7 Random Images. We're going to have two different JavaScripts here. So if I was doing something like this, I would definitely do it as an external JavaScript. We're going to just do it one page here. But after we're done with this, I'm going to have a little kind of an on your own assignment where I'm going to try to have you do something very similar to what we just did. But I'm going to have you do it as an external JavaScript. We're going to create two scripts. One is going to be between the head section, and that's where we're going to create the array that's going to store the images. And then we're going to create a second script inside the body of the web page, and that's the array. That's the script that's going to randomly print one of the items from the array. So let's do the first script. And let's define our array. And if you look in the online tutorial, it shows the old way, which is totally fine. And if you do that, there's no problem with that. I'm going to do the new way, but again, it's very almost exactly the same. And I'm going to create an array called image, and it should be all right. And I'm just going to create an empty array first called var image. And I could put all the items in here within quotes, but I just think it's harder to read, and maybe it's slightly harder to maintain. If you imagine if you might have had an array with 31 different images because you wanted a different image to appear for every day of the month. So it would be easier to keep track of if we could see the relationship between the index item and the actual image URL that I'm going to put here. So I want to put a URL, and I'm going to put the name, the path to the image, which we're in the JS folder. So I've got to get out of my JS folder. and then put the name of my images folder, and then I've got to put the name of the file of my image. So in this example, I put, I think it's kings.jpg. So you need to put, we might all need to look at our path names to make sure this is correct. So I'm going to kind of zoom out here, and I called it kings all lowercase .jpeg, and then my other one. So I'm going to go look and make sure you've got that right. So I'm going to call mine rain.jpg, nhl.jpg, and kings.jpg.
It doesn't let you browse, huh?
Well, it's JavaScript, so it's
Oh, got it.
Yeah, it won't. That's the bummer part.
Oh.
So you could go file open, and just to kind of look at and make sure you know what the names are. So I'm going to give you time to do that and find those names. And then, of course, you just increase the number for each one. And mine was NHL and rain. Print. We want to randomly print the images that we created or that we found and print them to the page. Right now, all this does is just print a single image. Was everyone able to get at least a single image on the page? So if you're not, let me look real quickly. So maybe you should pause it.